And it was more than that because it was really touching in the way that people responded and how they did things.
A protocol most people believed was untouchable was rewritten behind closed doors, and the person pushed aside was the one who had kept the system running for decades. While staff followed new instructions in silence, Camilla exercised power in the most dangerous way possible by changing rules instead of faces. The result was not loud conflict but calculated exclusion, and Princess Anne noticed immediately. Why was Anne the target? And what happens when protocol is used as a weapon? Stay tuned because this revelation is about to change how you view the monarchy. The protocol that never changed. The palace wakes the same way it has for decades, not with fanfare or ceremony, but with the soft click of heels on marble floors, the rustle of papers carried down hallways older than most nations, and the quiet murmur of voices that know better than to echo. By 6 in the morning, the ground floor corridors are already alive with movement, and staff members glide past one another with the practiced efficiency of dancers who have performed the same choreography 1,000 times. There are no collisions, no hesitations, because everyone knows where they should be and when they should be there. This is not enthusiasm. This is muscle memory. The kitchens have already sent up the first tea service, and the overnight security detail has filed its reports, while the Lord Chamberlain's office has reviewed the day's schedule and flagged 3 potential complications before most of the country has even opened their eyes. In a building this old, this layered with history and expectation, speed is never the goal because continuity is. Protocol is not written for convenience but to survive monarchs, ministers, marriages, and mistakes, designed to outlast the people it governs and to function regardless of who sits on the throne or stands beside it. These are rules that have weathered scandals that would have destroyed lesser institutions, survived transitions that might have fractured other governments, and maintained order through crises that could have plunged the nation into chaos. The protocols are not suggestions or guidelines, but ironclad frameworks that shape every decision, every movement, every utterance within these ancient walls. They exist in filing cabinets and computer systems, in the collective memory of senior staff, and in the instincts of those who have served long enough to feel when something is wrong. And for decades, one person has embodied that principle more completely than anyone else. Princess Anne. She does not give speeches about duty because she does not need to. Her presence is the speech. While others court the press or cultivate public affection, Anne simply works, and she attends more engagements than almost anyone in the royal family, often with little notice and less fanfare. She arrives on time, does what is required, and leaves without drama. Her calendar is a relentless march of hospital openings, military ceremonies, charity galas, school visits, and diplomatic receptions that blur together in a schedule that would exhaust someone half her age. She does not complain about the workload or seek recognition for the sheer volume of her contributions to the institution. Internally, she is known as something else entirely, the constant. Staff who have worked at the palace for decades speak of her with a particular kind of respect, not the performative deference reserved for monarchy, but the genuine regard earned by someone who knows the building better than the architects who renovated it. Anne knows which offices handle which functions, and she knows which clerks have been there longest. She knows which systems are fragile and which can withstand pressure. She remembers details that others forget, recalls conversations from years ago when they become suddenly relevant, and understands the connections between seemingly unrelated departments because she has watched them evolve over time. Her institutional memory is not just impressive, it is irreplaceable, a living archive of how things actually work beneath the surface of official procedure. More importantly, she knows when something is wrong. A delayed memo, a missing signature, a decision that should have gone through one office but somehow ended up in another. Anne notices these things the way a conductor notices a single instrument playing half a beat behind. And she corrects them, not loudly, not publicly, but decisively. She will send a brief note, make a quiet phone call, or simply appear in the right office at the right moment with a question that makes it clear she knows exactly what has happened and expects it to be fixed. Her interventions are surgical, targeted, and almost always effective because people know she is not acting out of ego or political calculation, but out of genuine concern for the institution itself. Her authority does not come from charm or charisma, but from the fact that year after year, decade after decade, she has simply been there. Reliable, unsentimental, unshakable. The palace depends on this. In a system built on tradition, Anne is the tradition. She does not need to remind people of her role because her presence does that for her. When she walks into a room, conversations shift slightly, postures straighten almost imperceptibly, and decisions that might have been made hastily are suddenly given more thought. This is not fear, but respect, the kind of respect that cannot be manufactured or demanded, but only earned through consistent, unglamorous, essential work. She has become part of the palace's operating system, woven so deeply into its daily functions that most people cannot imagine how it would work without her. But there is an unspoken understanding that runs through every department, every office, every corner of the institution. Anne does not seek attention, she seeks order. And in a place where disorder can spiral into crisis within hours, that makes her indispensable. She has prevented more problems than anyone will ever know about, caught mistakes before they became scandals, and smoothed over conflicts that could have paralyzed the institution for weeks. Her value is not in grand gestures or public moments, but in the thousand small interventions that keep the palace functioning smoothly. She is the person who ensures that the machine does not break down, that the protocols are followed not out of blind obedience, but out of genuine understanding of why they exist. Late one evening, after most of the staff has gone home, a senior official sits in his office reviewing a particularly tangled issue involving conflicting schedules and overlapping jurisdictions. He considers calling Anne's office. Then he remembers that he does not need to, because Anne has already sent a note with a suggested solution. He leans back in his chair and allows himself a rare moment of reflection. Some systems, he thinks, have never failed, because Anne has never allowed them to. The institution has survived scandals, divorces, deaths, and disasters, in large part because someone was always there making sure the basic machinery kept running. He wonders sometimes if people outside the palace understand this, if they realize that the stability they take for granted is not automatic, but maintained through constant, invisible effort. But stability becomes a problem the moment someone else decides it is in the way. Camilla's long frustration. Publicly, Camilla's position is secure. She is queen consort, the title is hers, the ceremonies have been completed, the public has, for the most part, adjusted. The coronation went smoothly, the press coverage was generally positive, and the opinion polls showed a slow but steady warming to her role. She has worked for years to reach this point, enduring decades of negative press, public hostility, and personal attacks that would have broken most people. She has been patient, strategic, and ultimately successful in transforming her image from the most hated woman in Britain to an accepted member of the royal family. On paper, she has achieved everything she set out to achieve. She sits beside the king, wears the crown, and performs the duties expected of someone in her position. But privately, inside the palace walls where titles matter less than influence, Camilla is constrained in ways the public never sees. There are decisions that bypass her entirely, meetings she is not invited to, conversations that happen without her input. And too many of them involve Princess Anne. This is not about protocol in the formal sense, but about something more fundamental. The palace operates on two levels: the visible hierarchy that the public understands, with clear titles and defined roles, and the invisible network of influence that actually determines how decisions are made. Camilla has conquered the visible hierarchy, but remains largely excluded from the invisible network. She can attend state banquets and cut ribbons at public events, but when it comes to the real machinery of the institution, she finds herself repeatedly shut out. Anne does not flatter. She does not adjust her behavior to suit personalities. She does not soften her opinions or dilute her recommendations to make them more palatable. If she thinks something is a bad idea, she says so. If she thinks a decision needs more scrutiny, she insists on it. And because she has been doing this longer than almost anyone currently working in the palace, her objections carry weight. When Anne questions a proposal, people listen. When she suggests an alternative approach, people consider it seriously. When she warns that something will cause problems, people believe her. This is not because she is intimidating or politically powerful, but because she has been right so many times before. Her track record speaks for itself and gives her a credibility that cannot be undermined by title or position. Camilla finds this intolerable. In private, she has begun describing Anne in terms that sound reasonable on the surface, but carry a sharper edge underneath. Anne is old-fashioned, she says, unadaptable, too embedded in the past. These complaints are shared selectively with people Camilla trusts, people who nod sympathetically and agree that perhaps it is time for a more modern approach. The language is always careful, never openly hostile, always framed as concern for the institution rather than personal animosity. But the subtext is clear to anyone paying attention. Camilla believes Anne is an obstacle, not to the monarchy as a whole, but to Camilla's own influence within it. She has begun testing the waters, seeing who agrees with her assessment and who might be willing to support a change. But the reality is simpler and more uncomfortable. Anne knows where everything is. She knows who to call when something goes wrong. She knows which files contain what information. She knows which decisions require consultation and which do not. More than that, Anne knows when to say no. And Camilla resents that more than anything else. Because no from Anne is not a refusal, but a reminder that the system has rules, and those rules exist for a reason. When Anne blocks something, she is not exercising arbitrary power, but applying standards that have been developed over generations. She is protecting the institution from shortcuts that might work in the short term, but create problems later. She is maintaining boundaries that others might not even realize exist until they have been crossed. Camilla does not see herself as someone who should be reminded. She is queen consort, and she has spent years navigating public opinion, managing her image, earning her place. And yet, when it comes to the internal workings of the institution, Anne still has more influence, not because of her title, not because of public affection, because she knows how the palace actually works. Camilla does not. And that gap in knowledge, that difference in institutional authority, gnaws at her. She has spent so much energy on the public dimension of her role, on rehabilitation and acceptance, that she never fully grasped the internal dimension. She assumed that once she had the title, the influence would follow automatically. She is learning too late that the palace does not work that way. She begins to ask questions. Why does Anne's office handle certain approvals? Why does Anne's signature appear on documents Camilla never sees? Why do staff defer to Anne's judgment even when Camilla has expressed a different opinion? The answers she receives are polite but unsatisfying. That has always been the process. Princess Anne oversees that area. It is a matter of long-standing practice. Camilla hears these explanations and understands them for what they are. Polite ways of saying this is not your decision. The bureaucratic language obscures a simple truth that everyone inside the palace understands, but no one will say directly. Anne's authority is not formal, but functional. She has it because the institution needs her to have it, because things work better when she is involved, because her judgment has proven reliable over decades. She realizes slowly, but with growing certainty, that the system will never shift on its own. The rules protect Anne. The precedents reinforce her authority. The structure itself is designed to resist exactly the kind of change Camilla wants. So Camilla decides that the structure must be changed. Not openly, not dramatically, but carefully. And rules inside the palace only change when someone dares to touch protocol. The quiet drafting of a dangerous change. Camilla does not announce her intentions. She does not call a meeting or issue a directive. Instead, she makes a request. It sounds reasonable, even prudent. She asks for a procedural review. The palace, she suggests, has operated under the same protocols for decades, and perhaps it is time to modernize, to streamline decision-making, to clarify lines of authority. The request is framed as a matter of efficiency, not power. She speaks about reducing redundancy, eliminating bottlenecks, making the institution more responsive to contemporary needs. She uses language borrowed from corporate management, from government reform initiatives, from modern organizational theory. It all sounds perfectly sensible. It all sounds like the kind of thing a forward-thinking leader would propose. And because it comes from the Queen Consort, it is taken seriously. A small group is assembled, legal advisors with expertise in constitutional matters, senior clerks who have worked in the palace long enough to understand the implications of even minor changes, trusted insiders who understand that discretion is not optional. The meetings are held quietly. No agenda is circulated in advance. No minutes are distributed afterward. The conversations are theoretical, at least at first. What would a more modern protocol structure look like? Which roles could be consolidated? Which approvals could be streamlined? The questions sound neutral, but the answers begin to point in a very specific direction. Every discussion, no matter where it starts, seems to circle back to the same issue: the concentration of oversight in certain long-standing roles. The group never mentions Anne by name at first, but everyone in the room knows exactly who they are talking about. Princess Anne's name comes up repeatedly. Her office oversees a wide range of functions, someone notes, perhaps too wide. Her approval is required for certain decisions that could, theoretically, be handled elsewhere. Her authority, while respected, is based on precedent rather than formal designation. What if someone suggests carefully that authority was clarified? What if decision-making were distributed more evenly? What if oversight were shared rather than concentrated? The language is vague enough to sound harmless, but the intent is clear. What they are discussing is not modernization. It is displacement. They are looking for ways to dilute Anne's influence without appearing to target her directly. They are building a procedural framework that will accomplish through technical language what could never be achieved through direct confrontation. Anne is deliberately excluded from these conversations. Her office is not consulted. Her staff is not informed. Her decades of experience are treated as irrelevant. This is not an oversight. It is the strategy. Because if Anne were involved, she would see exactly what is happening, and she would stop it. She would ask the questions that would expose the true purpose of the review. She would point out the risks that are being ignored. She would insist on safeguards that would undermine the entire project. So the decision is made quietly but firmly to proceed without her input, to present her with the results as a fait accompli, to make it harder for her to object by framing the changes as already decided, already approved, already in motion. The drafting process takes weeks. New language is crafted. Old protocols are reviewed and revised. Clauses are inserted that sound technical but carry enormous weight. Authority is quietly rerouted. Oversight is subtly reduced. Anne's role, once central, is redefined as advisory in areas where she previously held final approval. The changes are buried in procedural language. They are not dramatic. They do not abolish anything outright. They simply shift the ground beneath Anne's feet. A line here about delegation of authority, a paragraph there about distributed oversight, a clause about temporary measures that could easily become permanent. Each change seems minor in isolation, but together they form a new architecture that systematically marginalizes Anne while maintaining the appearance of continuity. One afternoon, a junior clerk is asked to format the revised protocol document. She reads through it carefully, as she has been trained to do, and then she stops. She rereads a particular section, then another. She sets the document down and stares at her screen. She realizes with a growing sense of unease that Princess Anne's role has been technically altered, not eliminated, not publicly reduced, but fundamentally weakened. The document removes her from decision-making processes she has overseen for decades. It creates new approval pathways that bypass her office entirely. It introduces language about consultation in places where her approval was previously required. The difference between consultation and approval is everything. One is mandatory, the other is optional. One gives you the power to stop something, the other merely allows you to express an opinion. She considers saying something, then she remembers who requested the review, and she returns to her work in silence. But technical changes matter more than loud ones in a place built on precedent. The day the protocol circulated, the memo arrives without warning. It is not sent to everyone, only to those whose roles are directly affected, only to those who need to know. There is no explanation attached, no briefing scheduled, No opportunity for questions. Just the document itself, labeled as an updated procedural framework. The subject line is bland. Revised Administrative Protocols, Implementation Date. The email arrives mid-morning, a time when people are already buried in their regular work, and the attachment looks like a dozen other administrative documents that circulate through the palace every week. At first glance, it does not seem particularly important or urgent, but the staff members who actually open it and begin reading discover something very different from the routine update they expected. They open it with curiosity, then confusion, then something closer to alarm, because what they are reading does not match what they understand. For years, they have known how things work. They have known which approvals go through which offices. They have known who has authority over what decisions. They have known the invisible architecture that holds the palace together. And now that architecture has been quietly rearranged, the changes are written in the dry, impersonal language of bureaucracy, full of phrases like streamlined processes and clarified responsibilities and enhanced coordination. But beneath the jargon, the message is unmistakable. The palace's internal power structure has been rewritten, and Princess Anne has been written out of large portions of it. The changes are not dramatic in isolation. A reporting line has been adjusted. An approval threshold has been shifted. Language has been added about temporary delegation in certain circumstances, but taken together, the effect is unmistakable. Princess Anne has been removed from automatic oversight. Decisions that once required her approval now bypass her office entirely. Staff members who once reported directly to her are now directed to other channels. And in areas where she previously held final authority, she must now request access. The document makes it sound like a rational reorganization, like the kind of administrative tidying that any large organization does periodically. But everyone who reads it understands the real message. Anne's institutional power has been cut off at the knees, and it has been done through memo rather than conversation. The language makes it sound neutral, even reasonable, but everyone who reads it understands what it really means. Anne has been demoted without being told. There was no meeting where someone sat down with her and explained that her role was changing. There was no consultation where her input was sought on how best to restructure the processes she has managed for decades. There was just this document, appearing in inboxes across the palace, presenting the changes as already decided and already in effect. The memo includes an implementation date just 3 days away, barely enough time to process what has happened, much less to object or propose alternatives. The speed itself is a message. This is not up for discussion. The staff reaction is immediate, though carefully concealed. In offices throughout the palace, people exchange glances but say nothing aloud. In hallways, conversations stop mid-sentence when the wrong person approaches. In private messages, questions are asked carefully, obliquely, because no one wants to be seen as questioning authority. But the questions are there. Did Anne know about this? Did she approve it? And if she did not, what does that mean for everyone else? Because if someone as established, as respected, as indispensable as Princess Anne can have her role rewritten without warning, then no one is safe. Authority is no longer about experience or institutional knowledge. It is about proximity to power, and right now power is being wielded by someone other than Anne. The staff begins to adjust. They hesitate before sending files to Anne's office. They check with other departments before following long-standing procedures. They wait for confirmation before acting on instructions that used to be routine. This hesitation creates delays, and delays create problems. But no one dares to say so, because silence in this moment feels safer than honesty. A culture of fear has been introduced into an institution that previously operated on trust and mutual respect. People who used to make decisions confidently now second-guess themselves. Processes that used to flow smoothly now stutter and stall. The palace is learning what it means to operate without the institutional glue that Anne provided. Late that afternoon, a senior aide sits alone in his office, the revised protocol document open on his desk. He has read it 3 times now, and each time the same word comes to mind: punishment. This is not modernization or streamlining or any of the other euphemisms used in the document. This is punishment. Princess Anne is being punished for being too competent, too independent, too unwilling to defer to the new power structure. She is being punished for saying no when no need to be said, for maintaining standards when others wanted shortcuts, for representing an institutional memory that some people find inconvenient. The punishment is not being carried out through confrontation but through paperwork, and that somehow makes it worse. But punishment only works if the target breaks. Princess Anne notices immediately. Anne does not need anyone to explain the memo to her. She sees it the same day everyone else does, reads it with the same careful attention she brings to every document that crosses her desk. Her face betrays nothing. Her posture does not change. She finishes reading, closes the document, and continues with her scheduled work. To anyone watching, she appears completely unaffected. But those who know her well, who have worked with her for years, recognize the signs. A slight tightness around her eyes, a fractional pause before she responds to questions, a quality of stillness that suggests intense mental activity beneath a calm surface. Anne's awareness begins not with the memo itself, but with what came before it. She noticed one delayed file 3 days ago, a routine approval that should have reached her office by Tuesday morning but did not arrive until Thursday afternoon. She noticed one unanswered call, a senior clerk who did not return her message despite having always responded within hours in the past. These are small things, the kind of things most people would dismiss as random variation, as the normal friction of a busy institution. But Anne does not dismiss them. She has learned over decades that small irregularities often signal larger problems, that patterns emerge before crises do, that by the time something becomes obvious to everyone, it is usually too late to address it effectively. Her response is calm, precise, controlled. She does not storm into anyone's office. She does not make accusations. She does not demand explanations. Instead, she asks questions, simple, direct questions. Why did this file take an extra day? Who authorized the change to that reporting structure? When was this decision made? The questions are delivered in her usual tone, matter-of-fact and businesslike, without apparent anger or concern. But the people who receive these questions understand immediately that something is wrong, because Anne only asks questions when she already knows the answer. She is not seeking information. She is testing whether people will tell her the truth, and the answers she receives tell her everything she needs to know. She receives vague answers. I believe there was some confusion about the process. That may have been part of the recent reorganization. I will need to check and get back to you. These are not answers, these are evasions. An evasion, in an institution that depends on clarity and precision, is as revealing as any confession. The people she asks cannot meet her eyes. They offer explanations that do not quite make sense. They promise to follow up and then do not. Anne catalogs each evasion, each inconsistency, each moment of uncomfortable silence. She is building a picture of what has happened. And the picture is becoming very clear. She sees deflection. When she presses for specifics, people suddenly remember other appointments. When she asks to see documentation, she is told it is still being finalized. When she suggests that something seems unusual, she is assured that everything is fine, just fine, nothing to worry about. The deflection is clumsy, almost insulting in its transparency. These are people who have worked with her for years, who know she will see through such obvious maneuvering. The fact that they are attempting it anyway tells her two things. First, they have been instructed to keep her in the dark. Second, whoever gave those instructions has enough power that even people who respect Anne are afraid to disobey. Her realization comes not as a sudden shock, but as a gradual crystallization of suspicion into certainty. This was planned, not accidental. The delayed files were not bureaucratic mistakes. The unreturned calls were not oversights. The changed procedures were not routine updates. Someone has been working systematically to undermine her position, and they have been doing it quietly, carefully, in a way designed to be irreversible before she even understood what was happening. The memo was just the formalization of what had already been done. The protocol changes were not the beginning of the process, but the end of it. By the time she saw the document, the decision had already been made. the new structure already implemented, the new reality already in place. Anne requests the protocol file herself, not through an assistant, not through channels. She walks to the appropriate office personally and asks for the complete documentation, including all drafts, all notes from the review process, all correspondence related to the changes. Her presence in the office is unusual enough to cause a momentary hush. People glance at each other nervously. The clerk she addresses hesitates, clearly considering whether to refuse or delay. Then he sees the expression on Anne's face and decides that compliance is the safer option. He retrieves the file without a word and hands it to her. She thanks him politely, turns, and walks back to her office with the thick folder under her arm. What she finds in that file confirms something far worse than a misunderstanding: the confrontation. Anne did not schedule the meeting through official channels. She did not send a request through secretaries or ask for an appointment through the usual protocols. She simply walked to Camilla's office one Tuesday afternoon at a time when she knew Camilla would be there, and she opened the door without knocking. The gesture itself was a statement. Camilla looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her face before she managed to compose her features into something approaching pleasant neutrality. There were 2 staff members in the room with her, both of whom froze the moment Anne entered. The air became instantly uncomfortable, charged with a tension that made breathing feel effortful. Anne's gaze moved to the staff members for just a moment, and that was all it took. They gathered their papers and left without needing to be told. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Now it was just the 2 of them, and there was nowhere for Camilla to hide behind procedural language or bureaucratic distance. Anne told Camilla they needed to talk. Her voice was calm, perfectly controlled, without a trace of anger. That somehow made it more menacing than if she had shouted. Anger could be deflected or dismissed. Calm fury could not. Camilla gestured toward the chair across from her desk, an attempt to establish the dynamic of a meeting, to create the illusion that this was a normal conversation between colleagues. Anne did not sit. She remained standing, and the choice forced Camilla to either stand as well or remain seated in a position that put her at a disadvantage. Camilla chose to stand, coming around from behind her desk, but maintaining distance between them. The physical choreography was as significant as anything that would be said. They were circling each other, measuring, calculating what comes next. Camilla said she assumed this was about the protocol revisions, her tone carefully neutral, as if they were discussing something mundane and administrative rather than a deliberate dismantling of Anne's institutional authority. She was trying to control the narrative, to frame this as a reasonable disagreement about process rather than what it actually was. But Anne had spent decades in rooms where power was exercised through implication and suggestion, and she was not about to let Camilla define the terms of this conversation. Anne told her it was about the fact that she had rewritten Anne's role in the institution without having the courage to discuss it with her first. Her voice remained perfectly even, still utterly controlled. Every word was precise and deliberate. She was not ranting or venting emotion. She was stating facts and demanding accountability. Camilla attempted a placating smile, the kind of expression that had served her well in navigating difficult public situations, the carefully calibrated warmth that suggested understanding and good intentions. But it slid off Anne like water off stone. Camilla insisted it was not personal and explained that the institution needed modernization, that some of the older structures were simply not functioning efficiently anymore. She added that surely Anne could understand the need for change. The words were rehearsed, probably prepared in advance for exactly this conversation. Camilla had anticipated this confrontation and prepared her defense, but the defense was built on lies, and both women knew it. Anne's expression did not change, but something in her eyes hardened. She told Camilla not to insult her intelligence. She pointed out that there was nothing broken about the structures Camilla had dismantled. This was not about efficiency, Anne stated clearly. This was about removing her from oversight, so that Camilla could operate without someone questioning her decisions. The accusation hung in the air between them, brutal and direct. Camilla's smile faltered. She opened her mouth to respond, but Anne continued before she could formulate whatever denial or deflection she had planned. Anne reminded Camilla that she had spent 40 years building the institutional knowledge that kept the place functioning. She knew where every file was kept, which decisions required consultation and which did not, the difference between precedent and preference. Camilla did not, and rather than learn from people who did know, rather than work within a system that had survived longer than either of them, Anne continued, Camilla had decided to rewrite the rules so that her ignorance would not be exposed. The words were devastating precisely because they were delivered without heat. Anne was not losing her temper. She was simply stating facts that both of them understood to be true. Camilla's face flushed slightly, the first real crack in her composure. She reminded Anne that she was queen consort and that she had authority that came with that position. Anne may have been there longer, Camilla added with an edge in her voice, but that did not give her the right to undermine Camilla's role or question her decisions. She was trying to reclaim control by invoking her title, by reminding Anne of the formal hierarchy. But formal hierarchy and actual power were not the same thing, and Anne knew it better than anyone. Anne stated calmly that Camilla's title gave her ceremonial authority, but it did not give her institutional competence. And it certainly did not give her the right to dismantle systems she did not understand simply because they inconvenienced her. The statement was so direct, so utterly without diplomatic cushioning, that Camilla actually took a step back. She had spent years cultivating relationships through charm and careful image management. She had learned to navigate difficult situations by being agreeable, by finding common ground, by making people feel heard even when she had no intention of changing course. But none of that worked on Anne. Anne could not be charmed or flattered or managed. She could only be confronted with truth or lies, and she had an unerring instinct for telling the difference between the two. Anne continued by pointing out that Camilla had excluded her from the review process deliberately. Camilla had known Anne would object to what was being planned, had known she would point out the risks and problems. So Camilla had simply written the protocols without her and presented them as fait accompli. That was not leadership, Anne declared. That was cowardice. Camilla's jaw tightened. She insisted she had done what needed to be done, and now the pretense of politeness was gone entirely. She accused Anne of operating like she owned the institution for decades, of acting as if her approval was required for everything, as if the rest of them existed to defer to her judgment. That may have been acceptable before, Camilla continued with barely contained anger, but things had changed. She had authority now, and she would not spend her time waiting for Anne's permission to exercise it. The resentment that had been building for months came pouring out. This was what Camilla had wanted to say for a long time, the frustration she had carefully concealed behind reasonable-sounding complaints about modernization and efficiency. She was tired of being checked by Anne, tired of having her decisions questioned, tired of being reminded that title and competence were different things. Anne told Camilla she could keep her protocols and her reorganization, could continue pretending that bureaucratic authority was the same as institutional legitimacy. But she warned Camilla that when things went wrong, when the systems started failing and the problems began multiplying, people would remember who dismantled the structures that kept the palace functioning. They would remember who pushed aside the people who actually knew how things worked in favor of people who simply wanted power, and they would remember who had warned them. Anne then turned and walked toward the door. She had said what she came to say, and there was nothing more to discuss. Camilla called after her, demanded she come back, and insisted they were not finished. But Anne opened the door and walked out without looking back, leaving Camilla standing alone in her office, surrounded by the trappings of authority but utterly stripped of dignity. The confrontation was over, and both women knew who had won.